the one who didn't need permission to take up space. The silence didn't break her. It brought her home to herself. She used to hide her tears like they were secrets. Turning away from mirrors, wiping her face quickly when someone walked in, pretending the redness in her eyes was just from being tired. But inside, she was carrying oceans, and no one knew how hard it was to hold back the flood. Somewhere along the way, she was told that crying made her dramatic, too emotional, too soft. So she held it in. She smiled when it hurt. She laughed when she wanted to scream. But the more she buried it, the heavier it became. Until one day, she let go. The tears came, and this time, she let them fall. Not quietly, not carefully, honestly, and in those tears, something shifted. They weren't a sign of weakness. They were release. They were truth. They were the voice of the heart, speaking in a language no one could fake. With each tear, she washed away pieces of herself that were never truly hers. Expectations, guilt, shame, fear. The tears didn't just fall from her eyes. They rose from her soul, purging the pain that had been building in silence. She cried for the version of her that settled. She cried for the time she kept quiet to keep the peace. She cried for the love she gave so freely, only to be met with emptiness. And then she cried for herself, not out of sadness, but out of recognition, because she finally saw her own strength. Her tears became sacred, no longer hidden, no longer ashamed. They didn't ruin her. They rebuilt her. There was a time when her reflection depended on someone else's gaze, when she needed their words to feel beautiful, their attention to feel visible, their love to feel enough. She gave pieces of herself away, hoping it would buy her belonging. But all it did was leave her empty. She didn't know it then, but she had been measuring her worth with broken rulers, judging her value based on how someone treated her on their worst day. Believing that if they walked away must mean something was wrong with her. But the truth? Her worth was never up for debate. And not one compliment, one apology, one regret could define what's always been true, that she is whole, even when misunderstood, that her value doesn't rise and fall with someone else's ability to see it. She stopped waiting for someone to validate her existence. She stopped shrinking to become easier to love. She stopped tying her confidence to how many times her phone lit up, or how many hearts appeared next to her photo. Because now she knows her power was never in being chosen by others. It was in choosing herself. Her worth lives in her breath and her courage to wake up after heartbreak and her laughter returning after silence. It's in the way she continues to give, even after being taken for granted. It's in the way she keeps showing up for herself, especially when no one else does. She no longer begs to be seen. She sees herself clearly, fiercely, fully, and that vision, that's everything. There was a time she waited to be noticed, waited to be loved the way she deserved, waited for someone to choose her, to fight for her, to make her feel like she mattered. And in that waiting, she lost herself piece by piece, thinking maybe if she was more or less or different, someone would finally stay. But one day, she stopped waiting, because she realized her life was not a question mark hanging in someone else's mouth. She wasn't a maybe. She wasn't an option. She was never meant to sit on the sidelines of her own story, hoping someone would hand her the pen. So she stood up, quietly at first, then steadily, then with fire. She chose her zone, not because it was easy, but because it was time. Time to take back the power she had handed over in soft apologies and second chances. Time to remember that being wanted is not the same as being valued. Time to stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold her. She stopped asking, "What's wrong with me?" and started declaring, "There's everything right with me." Now she leads her own life without waiting for permission. She doesn't chase approval, she lives in alignment. She doesn't beg for love, she becomes it. And she no longer hopes someone will save her because she saved herself. Her power was never lost. It was just buried beneath fear, beneath compromise, beneath the need to be accepted. And now that she's uncovered it, she's unstoppable. They say starting over is scary, and it is. She won't pretend it wasn't, because letting go of the familiar, even when it hurts, can feel like tearing away part of your skin. There were nights she stared at her ceiling, wondering if she made the right choice. If she walked away too soon. If maybe she should have stayed, fought harder, waited longer. But deep down, something sacred was rising in her. Quiet knowing, a voice that whispered, "You've outgrown this. It's okay to begin again." She used to think new beginnings meant failure, that they meant the past had won. But now she knows Starting over is a form of strength. It takes courage to say, this version of me no longer fits into that story. It takes bravery to walk away from what once felt like everything and still believe in what's ahead. She didn't start over because she gave up. She started over because she woke up. Woke up to the truth that life isn't meant to be lived in cycles of confusion and disappointment. Woke up to the realization that healing isn't found in returning. It's found in reclaiming. Woke up to her own worth, her own voice, her own path. Now each sunrise feels like a quiet promise. A reminder that she's not behind, she's not late, she's just rewriting. With cleaner pages, with wiser hands, with a heart that has learned not to settle. This new beginning isn't a step backward, it's her boldest step forward. She used to believe that walking away meant giving up, that letting go was the same as losing. So she stayed longer than she should have. She held on with trembling hands and a hopeful heart, convinced that maybe one more try, one more compromise, one more piece of herself would be enough to make it work. But it never was. The truth is, she was taught to equate endurance with love, to believe that staying through pain was a virtue, that if something hurt, it was just part of the process, and she needed to be strong enough to endure it. So she kept forgiving what wasn't sincere. She kept swallowing her voice just to keep the peace. She kept shrinking herself to fit into a version of love that was never meant for her. And it broke her slowly, but something changed the day she looked at herself, not through someone else's eyes, but through her own. She saw the exhaustion in her soul, the way her spark had dimmed, the way her laughter no longer reached her eyes. And in that moment, she made a decision that changed everything. She chose herself. She walked away, not out of bitterness, not out of weakness, but out of reverence for who she was becoming. She realized that walking away doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally recognized what you deserve. It means you stopped accepting confusion as clarity. It means you're brave enough to release what no longer serves your growth. There is a quiet power in walking away. It doesn't scream. It doesn't need an audience. It happens in silence and strength and sacred self-respect and sacred self-respect. And while the world might call it selfish, she knows now it's survival. It's sanity. It's self-love in its fiercest form. She didn't walk away because she didn't care. She walked away because she finally did. She walked away to protect the parts of her that were still whole, still hopeful, still healing. And now, with each step forward, she reclaims herself, freer, stronger, more certain than ever that peace is worth more than proximity, and dignity is worth more than staying small. There was a time when she softened her story so others could stay comfortable. She held her tongue to avoid being too much. She dimmed her truth to protect people who never once protected her. And in doing so, she built a quiet prison around herself, one made of politeness, silence, and fear. But the truth doesn't disappear just because you silence it. It waits. It sits inside you like a storm, rising and swelling until one day it can no longer be contained. And for her, that day finally came. She got tired of pretending, tired of rewriting the past to make others look better, tired of walking on emotional eggshells just to keep the peace, tired of performing strength while privately drowning in doubt. So she stopped hiding. She let it out, the pain, the confusion, the anger, the clarity. And for the first time, she said it all, not to hurt anyone, but to free herself. Because the truth isn't cruel, it's clean. It doesn't destroy, it clears the way. And by owning her truth, she began to shed the weight of guilt that was never hers to carry. She told her story in her own words, not with blame, but with boldness. She looked at the broken parts and didn't flinch. She didn't make excuses for anyone else, and she didn't erase her own feelings just to be seen as kind. She realized that kindness without honesty is just self-abandonment, and she was done abandoning herself. Some people called her cold. Some called her dramatic. But she knew better. She knew better. She wasn't cold. She was clear. She wasn't dramatic. She was finally honest. Now, her truth walks with her everywhere. It's in the way she holds her head high, even when people try to define her by the version they created in their mind. And it's in the way she stops explaining herself to those who are committed to misunderstanding her. It changed everything. There was a time when her silence came from fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of not being believed. Fear of being misunderstood, twisted into someone she wasn't. So she bit her tongue, swallowed her feelings, and stayed quiet. even when everything inside her screamed to be heard. She used to think silence meant surrender, that staying quiet made her small, made her invisible, visible, that if she didn't fight back, didn't explain, didn't defend, then somehow she'd lost. And so for a while, she tried to prove herself to everyone. She explained her heart to people who didn't deserve to hear it. She tried to correct rumors, reshape perceptions, convince others of her worth. But all that noise left her exhausted and empty. Then something shifted. She realized that not every battle is hers to fight. Not every accusation needs a rebuttal. And not every wound needs to be reopened just to prove it exists. She learned the value of peace over performance, of healing over reaction, of self-respect over validation. Now, when she goes quiet, it's not because she's afraid, it's because she's focused. She's centered. She's listening to herself, to what really matters, to the whisper of her own intuition that always knew the way. Her silence is no longer filled with suppressed pain. It's filled with clarity. She no longer speaks just to be heard. She speaks when it's worth it, when it's real. She knows now that presence doesn't always need volume. Sometimes the loudest thing in the room is the person who doesn't need to prove anything. There's a sacred power in choosing stillness when chaos calls, a quiet revolution in walking away when provoked, deep knowing and sitting with your emotions rather than spilling them just for sympathy. She no longer explains her boundaries. She simply holds them. She no longer tries to fix misunderstandings with people committed to their version of her. She no longer throws herself into every fire just to prove she can handle the heat. She's learned the language of stillness, of reflection, of trusting that not everything requires a response, and not everyone deserves one. Her silence is no longer her cage. It is her sanctuary. It is where she recalibrates, regenerates, and reclaims her energy. She's not less powerful because she doesn't shout. She's more powerful because she doesn't need to. She looks in the mirror now, and what she sees is not a girl trying to pick up the broken pieces. She sees a woman who built something entirely new from them. There was a version of her that cried quietly at night, whispering apologies into the darkness for being too much, for not being enough, for not being enough, for not being able to make someone stay. That version of her lived in shadows, constantly shrinking to fit into spaces that were never made for her. She had mastered the art of hiding behind politeness, behind compromise, behind a smile that didn't always reach her eyes. And while others thought she was fine, even happy, only she knew the weight she carried just to make it through the day. But that's not who she is now. She didn't just heal, she evolved. Her transformation wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't come with confetti or applause. It came in quiet, daily decisions to choose herself, to show up for her own heart, to stop begging for love that had to be earned. She learned to speak kindly to herself, especially on the days when no one else did. She became her own home, her own compass, her own peace. She stopped asking a why me, and started asking a what now. She didn't let the pain define her. She let it teach her. She became softer but not weaker, stronger but not colder. She found grace in her scars and purpose in her past. Where once there was desperation, now there is discernment. Where once there was overgiving, now there are boundaries that do not bend. She's no longer obsessed with being chosen. She chose herself. She's no longer waiting to be understood. She understands herself. She's no longer dreaming of rescue. She rescued herself. People who once knew her think they still do. They don't. They remember the girl who tolerated too much, spoke too little, and doubted her worth. But she is not that girl anymore. She is the woman who walked through fire and didn't just survive. She came out glowing, with a new standard, with a heart that still loves but no longer pleads, with a voice that trembled but never gave up. She wears her evolution like armor now, not to shut people out, but to honor the journey she fought so hard to take. She knows she can never go back to who she was, and she wouldn't even if she could. Because who she is now wasn't found. She was created, built in the aftermath, forged in heartbreak, refined through truth. She's not who she was, she's who she chose to become. So if you see her now, walking with quiet confidence, holding her head a little higher, loving without losing herself, know this: she didn't get here by accident. She got here by rising again and again when it would have been easier to stay down, by choosing truth over comfort, growth over familiarity, and herself over approval. She is living proof that you can be both a masterpiece and a work in progress, that the past does not define you, the courage to begin again does. And maybe you're not there yet, and maybe you're still in the middle of your own becoming. That's okay. Just know that your story isn't over. You are allowed to rewrite it, to outgrow old versions of yourself, to evolve loudly, unapologetically, and entirely on your own terms, because healing is not forgetting. It's remembering who you are and choosing every single day to become her.